Good evening. Our encounters tonight include a look at the phantom plains of the Peak District. That's a little later. Ever since the first photograph was taken, researchers have tried to capture the ultimate image, the paranormal on film. The invention of camcorders has stepped up the search. Every couple of weeks or so, a new video clip generates a fresh wave of excitement. After all, the camera doesn't lie. Or does it? Tonight, we examine evidence of the paranormal captured on camera. Pictures that can be explained and those that can't.
On this unknown aircraft, T1 control doesn't know what type of aircraft it is either.
Flying saucers, ghouls and phantoms. Fact or fiction? Will we ever be sure? One thing is certain, this is a fake. 60 years after this picture of the Loch Ness Monster was taken, one of the team behind it admitted it was a hoax. Nothing more than a model monster powered by a toy submarine. These pictures convinced and baffled a generation after World War I. The so-called Cottingley fairies had even persuaded Sherlock Holmes author Arthur Conan Doyle. But 65 years later, Elsie Hill, one of the two cousins who took the pictures, finally admitted it was all a fake. These types of hoaxes come as no surprise to the founder of this magazine, who's made a career out of debunking paranormal stories.
These are classic cases of things that have deceived people. When we look at them today with now decades of experience of looking at photographs and special effects on movie screens, they look very fake.
In my experience, I've never actually seen either a paranormal picture or ghostly image that's not been faked or worked on. If you take the Cottingley fairies, you have the young lady looking at a fairy. Although her eyes are actually quite far away, you have a mismatch of focus. The fairy is very close to her, yet she's looking far away.
So just how easy is it to mock up a convincing photo? Student photographer Ian Lott took these pictures. A UFO over Worcestershire. Ian's photos began as two paper plates simply wrapped together in silver foil and suspended from cotton. He photographed that and in the darkroom superimposed the image onto a background of open countryside. The result, a passable image of a flying saucer.
The thing that happens if you have researchers who really, really want to believe in something is that they can be inclined to see what they want to see rather than what's actually there.
This looks like a flying saucer and fooled many until the photographer admitted it was nothing more than a car hubcap. So how do you tell whether a picture has been faked?
If you look at any image, it's quite possible to pick up telltale signs such as eyes not focusing, such as different contrast levels, such as different lighting techniques.
Paranormal researchers have also pointed to photographs, such as this one taken in Raynham Hall, Norfolk, as evidence that ghosts exist.
I love this photograph. I think it's a great photograph. There are so many techniques for double exposures and everything else that it's really hard to take it seriously as a genuine photograph of a ghost.
Here's another ghostly apparition, but this is another of Ian Lott's fakes.
All I done was just take a picture of somebody walking down the stairs, then reshot the same photograph without the person on the stairs, and it actually gave them a translucent image.
This picture caused a storm when it was published. Does it show the ghost of a young girl pictured in the burnt remnants of Wem Town Hall in Shropshire?
The image of the young lady standing on the balcony, you can quite clearly see on the midriff, on the shoulders, through her arms, there has been a double density, almost the image coming through the bars, which is typically where you would lay one image on another. And all these things point to, certainly in the Wem pictures, that there has been possibly some double image or double exposing, which gives it that impression of a ghostly image.
Writer and photographer Robert Irving produced this photograph only to find it the center of worldwide stories about aliens landing on Earth. Robert created the picture to illustrate an article he was writing for Fortean Times about an Italian UFO scare.
As soon as the article came out, the Italian media jumped on it, basically, and published it, portrayed it as genuine. A photograph of a UFO in a hangar seemed to be exactly what they needed.
The whole thing was so easy to do. Robert created his photograph on a computer. Modern programs allow you to manipulate any image.
The scope of these things is unlimited. Anything can be done. The only limits are the imagination, really. Basically, I just took a lot of care recreating the struts in front of the flying saucer. It gave it an added extra realism.
Trick photography is nothing new, and there are many reasons why people go to such lengths to fake photographs.
I figured that we could all do with a photograph of a UFO in a hangar. I did it for fun.
But what about photographs that are genuine but simply misleading? For example, this one, apparently of a UFO.
To me, this is a great example of a picture that was not taken in order to deceive anybody, but is extremely deceptive.
In fact, the US government released the image to show how easily people can misinterpret what they see in the sky. Actually, it's a B-36 bomber taken from an unusual angle.
The belief that the camera never lies is completely wrong, and photographers have always known this.
Moving images present the same difficulties. Is this a UFO, or is there a more mundane explanation?
It's quite common that you'll get an effect of a light appearing in the lens, sort of hanging in the sky. This can look like a square or diamond shape, or even a pentagon. That's actually caused by stray light coming into the lens and being reflected off the internal surfaces of the lenses, and you get a mirror image inside the lens of the lens iris unit, and in effect you're seeing something that isn't really there.
Objects apparently moving of their own free will, filmed from the space shuttle, caused excitement among UFO researchers. But in fact they could be explained away as shuttle debris and waste being ejected into orbit. And what about this picture, apparently of a face in Mars, taken by a NASA space probe? Is it a natural formation or something built by a race of Martians? The idea that human beings have a large primate cousin was given extra credence with this film of the creature known as Bigfoot, taken in North America. But what do scientists think?
I first saw that clip about 30 years ago, and I thought it was a hoax then, and I think it's a hoax now. It looks very much to me like a man in a monkey suit. The limb proportions and body shape are entirely human. The gait is human with a few exaggerations, a bit of extra arm swinging and so on. The most convincing thing was the way that the coat ripples. The coat is not attached, as it were, to the underlying flesh.
And what about this? Is the idea of a flying saucer over Manhattan just too strange to be true?
I really think if there were a flying saucer barreling around Manhattan, first of all, the comedian David Letterman would be out getting it on his show. Second of all those tourists on the Empire State Building would be taking lots of pictures of it. It's just hard for me to believe that in a city the size and never sleep character of New York, it would be hidden.
But there are some items that still intrigue and baffle once hoaxes, photographic mishaps and anomalies are ruled out. This photograph of a Navy unit taken in 1919, for example. Despite extensive analysis, no one has come up with an explanation for the presence of the apparition in the back row, a former member of the unit who'd been killed 3 days earlier.
When I first saw this photograph, I assumed it was a fake. In the back row, the chap fourth from the left, looking over his left shoulder, there's the ghostly face of a naval mechanic, Freddie Jackson, who'd been killed in an accident some 3 days earlier on the base. He'd walked into a propeller. The photographer, as far as I know, wouldn't have been aware of this accident.
Make up your own mind about these UFOs filmed in Las Vegas by Englishman Ray Wardle.
For some reason, I went up onto the roof of the garage at work and started filming what I thought was probably 2 planes coming into land, until one dived very, very fast towards the ground. Then some minutes later, a third one comes along, which is probably 2 to 3 times the size. These 2 objects which are floating around, they seem to lock onto it. A few minutes after that, there is an airplane going into land at McCarran Airport. So now we know that these aren't airplanes. I've had it analysed, and nobody has come up with any logical explanation of what it is. I've had people suggest that it's a hoax. Well, if it is, I didn't hoax it.
Kenneth Arnold reported seeing objects flying in formation at nearly 2,000 miles an hour. The media leapt on two words he used to describe what he saw: flying saucers. And so began the modern UFO phenomenon. Today, there is one small town in America where UFO mania has swept through the local population, sparking off an unprecedented frenzy of reported sightings and bizarre claims. Could hundreds of witnesses be mistaken, or is there really something out there? The town of Gulf Breeze spends its time basking in the subtropical sun of the Florida Panhandle. Separated from the mainland, it wallows in the superheated waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Nothing much used to happen in this small, affluent town, apart from the occasional wrath of a hurricane. But on November the 11th, 1987, a new storm hit town that would change the lives of some of the residents forever.
My thoughts were to catch a picture of it as it went overhead. This strange blue beam came out of it and struck me.
And this object was just hovering, it was perfectly still.
We're seeing something that we're obviously seeing, but we have no concept of what it is that we're seeing.
It's coming towards us, and then closer to us.
Whoa! No!
It was a reader's contribution to a local Gulf Breeze newspaper which sparked off a unique phenomenon which would draw in tens of thousands of people.
I returned to the office one day, and my secretary said that a man had brought in some UFO photographs taken in Gulf Breeze. I looked at them, and they were Polaroids, and I felt, how do you fake a Polaroid? My folks stopped in the office, and I said, you're not going to believe what we're getting ready to run in the paper this week. And they looked at the photographs, and they said, where'd you get these photographs? That's what we saw. And it turns out that they saw the same night, the same craft. I lost all inhibitions about going big with the story, because if you can't trust your mother, who can you trust?
The story had a major impact on the town. TV and newspaper reporters flocked to the area to investigate.
To report sightings of unidentified flying objects known as UFOs.
They weren't the only ones looking into it. Don Ware, a retired colonel in the US Air Force, and Charles Flanagan were sent by MUFON, the international UFO organization, to investigate the origin of the Polaroids.
In those photos, there were two key details that was of primary interest to me. One was an electrical junction box that sits high on the pole, and the other was where the photographer had to have been standing behind a cedar tree.
The photos had been delivered by a local man, Ed Walters, who said they'd been taken by a neighbor who wanted to remain known only as Mr. X.
We were kind of concerned about finding out exactly which neighbor of Ed's was Mr. X and where the pictures were taken.
We drove streets at all times of the day looking for those two key objects. Eventually, after 7 or 8 days, we found the location.
Lo and behold, it turned out to be Ed's front yard.
Ed Walters was a well-known man in Gulf Breeze. A pillar of the community, he employed over 200 people in his successful building firm and had a good reputation, something he didn't want to lose.
I was concerned the UFO stigma would stick. And certainly, you just don't want to be known as the general contractor who sees UFOs. So when I first went to the newspaper, I said, oh, a friend of mine, you know. But of course, you know, the friend of mine story just never does hold up.
With Ed Walters admitting he had taken the Polaroids, the MUFON investigators moved up a gear.
Had no idea at all at that point how big this case may become.
January 7th, 1988.
But as with all investigations, we must remain skeptical, but with an open mind.
Well, gentlemen, I believe these are what you came to see. Mr. Walters, you mind telling us how you came to take these photographs?
I deal in concrete and steel and real life And to look out my window at my office at my house and see something unusual didn't necessarily bother me, because normally you would explain it away. And I got up from my desk and kind of looked through the window, and it's behind the trees. What is that? So I grabbed a camera, a little Polaroid camera I use on job sites. The more time I looked at it, which this was all happening very quickly, the more I realized that this was not something I could explain away. A lot of thoughts went through my mind. My goodness, could I really be looking at a UFO? This was a very magnificent looking craft, silent, wingless. The UFO turned and started in my direction. My thoughts were to catch a picture of it as it went overhead. This strange blue beam came out of it and struck me. Having said that, you must realize that that sounds bizarre to my ears. So I know that somebody listening to me say I was struck by a blue beam, their eyes have got to roll back in their head and go, oh my goodness, this is true.
From the initial meeting with Ed Walters, he was extremely cooperative. I found him to be a very detailed individual, and I enjoyed working with him. I would ask Ed the same question 2 or 3 times, only I would word it in different ways. And always it came up with the same conclusion.
Ed Walters' pictures also attracted the interest of Dr. Bruce Maccabee, an optical physicist with the US Navy. He's worked, among other things, on the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars project. He spent over 30 years investigating UFO sightings.
A lot of time was spent on the first photograph to determine whether or not it could have been created as a simple double exposure. Seemed to be if not a legitimate photo, if it was a hoax, it was extremely difficult. George Lucas could probably do with the strange light company that he runs, but Ed Walters couldn't do with his little Polaroid.
But not everyone was impressed. Ed was accused of hoaxing and publicly ridiculed in the press. The story might have ended there until another witness came forward, church elder Art Hufford.
They were putting front page headlines about UFO experts declaring Gulf Breeze photographs a hoax, and claiming that it was something that somebody had done in a dark room with trick photography. And that made me a little angry because I knew there was no trick photography or mirrors on the windshield of my car.
Art claimed to have witnessed the same UFO as Ed photographed just a few miles away on the same day.
My wife and I had been in town and setting up tables at our church. As we were driving towards our home, suddenly up ahead I saw this craft hovering above trees, and I pointed it out to my wife, and we watched this thing as I drove toward it. It looked like nothing we had ever seen before. This oval crown-shaped looking craft had a very bright white light on the top, and the base of the craft was emitting a bright white light as well.
That's not a helicopter, that's not a plane.
And it was just hovering there above trees, probably 2, maybe 3 blocks in front of our car. My concept at the time of people who had reported UFO sightings, I always thought that was probably somebody who had too much to drink or something.
It became apparent that it was not just an Ed Walters UFO, because many other witnesses came forward, city council people, ministers, so many people that we felt like it was a whole community-wide thing.
From November of 1987 to July of 1988, there were probably well over 100 sightings with several hundred witnesses involved.
The floodgates had opened. It seemed that everyone had a UFO story.
I saw what I thought was a shooting star, and it went whew, like this and just stopped. And then all of a sudden, another one came like this.
A red light came in and it pulsated for a while, and then it turned bright white.
And there was this huge orange globe hanging there. It was about like 4 stories high, and it was hovering over the water.
I was walking and looked up and I saw a big shining green oval shining right through the cloud. It was very vivid color, very bright neon green.
It was a very bright red light, most like a traffic light up in the sky almost, all by itself, and it just came in from nowhere.
And another one came from another direction like that. And they just kind of hovered.
It terrified me because I was afraid to keep on walking, but there's nowhere I could go and nobody could hear me if anything was going to happen to me.
4 orange balls just popped in with 3 balls on the top, big, bright, reddish-orange balls, and I thought, oh my God, what is that?
My wife was driving me to the post office, that's where I work, and she noticed something shoot in front of our car. And she said, Ken, did you see that?
And I could only yell at him saying, look out of the window, look out the side window, there's something out there, look out there, there's a plane or a helicopter.
It appeared like you could see through some layers of it, although it wasn't totally transparent, like a marble would be, okay? And inside there appeared to be some swirling gas or fluids.
Around the center of it, there was one light that was chasing around, you know, like Christmas tree lights, and this object was just hovering. I wasn't really afraid, I couldn't use that term, just sheer amazement, because I just couldn't believe, you know, you can't believe your eyes.
There's nothing.
It's rubbish.
I spent 7 years in the Air Force. I've seen many different aircraft. We're seeing something that we're obviously seeing, but we have no concept of what it is that we're seeing.
The atmosphere in Gulf Breeze started to reach fever pitch, with people desperate to see their own UFO. Residents started to congregate on the beaches at night and became known as the Sky Watchers.
Come on, follow it down. Shoot her up. Shoot her up.
Shoot her up.
Turning. It's turning.
Something's pointing down out of it.
There is. Oh, big, red, bright. It's coming towards us, isn't it? It's closer to us. I can see that with my naked eye. Wow. And it's shooting out to the right a little bit.
We started going out on watches, and from there on, it's just been a wild and crazy ride of watching UFOs in the sky around here.
There's 2 of them. There's 3 of them. Did you see the white? Did you see the white flag spot in the middle with the ring all around it? Points of light all around it. Look, drop. Look.
Oh, look, it's brighter. Yo, look, it's right there.
Just drop them out, go, Bubba. Come on over here and show us some more, Bubba.
No, don't go away. Oh, no, come back.
That baby went in warp drive.
They did strange things, moved around, strange motions in the sky. Sometimes they would fall and disappear. Sometimes they would stop and turn red. At times you could see the object revolving.
Wally. Oh, whoa. What's going on up there?
This is a modeling.
2 of them. It's got something hanging out the side.
Damn. I not see it. Good Lord.
What is that baby doing?
And one of the things we were trying to do was to see if we could get some sort of interaction with the UFOs themselves. 2 waves of UFOs, bright cherry red lights appeared. We had this handheld 500,000 candle power light, and by flashing that light 3 times at the UFO blinked back 3 times.
Look, drop. Look.
It was very profound to have that interaction. So there's some intelligence on the other side of this thing that's aware of us and is responding to us.
So what were the Sky Watchers seeing? They believed that they were UFOs, but was there another answer?
Most people want to be a part of the crowd or to be a part of what's going on.
And I think this may have something to do with some people's experiences. There are some people on the periphery of the experience that will feel like they have a need to be a part of what's actually happening.
All right, the plane is going right toward it. The plane went right in front of it.
If people really had seen something, could the answer be found closer to home? Gulf Breeze has one of the world's highest concentrations of air bases, which makes it almost impossible not to see an aircraft when you look up at the sky.
A large number of people, perhaps even as much as 80% of the more people observe craft in the area, are simply observing misidentified objects such as the planet Venus or a meteorite, or simply airplanes observed by an untrained eye. And we identify a lot of reports as being aircraft.
But ex-US Air Force pilot Bland Pugh believes he has pictures which prove otherwise.
I started out taking fast photography, if you will, using 1,000mm film. All I was getting, no matter what I did, was a red light and or a red light with an orange center. I knew there had to be something else there, so the only thing that I could think of was to go to a time exposure. We noticed that there was some movement left to right, left to right. We could see that these oscillations were in a set pattern.
Bland also photographed aeroplanes, comparing their straight flight patterns with the erratic path of the UFOs.
I spent almost 5 years in the military, in the Air Force. I've seen enough airplanes. I've been in enough airplanes. I was a pilot at one time. I'm sorry, they're not airplanes.
Inconclusive, perhaps. More intriguing are a set of pictures taken of a reported incident in January 1994. 3 F-15 Eagle fighters were claimed to have approached an unidentified craft hovering over Santa Rosa Sound, Gulf Breeze.
There are 3 jets, 2 high and 1 low, coming in towards this object. And it turns out that the photo shows the jet actually blocking part of the image of the UFO. This jet flew along and actually made a little bit of a turn around the thing, indicating the guy must have seen it.
If the picture isn't faked, could there be a more down-to-earth explanation for the object in the sky?
I am now convinced that some major contractors in the US of A are building vehicles that appear similar to some of the UFO sightings.
Who's to say that it's not military? However, Gulf Breeze has a population of 30,000 people. I don't think that the military is going to use a populated area of this size to experiment. I just don't believe that.
The military remain tight-lipped on the affair. Their only comment is that all investigations into UFOs ceased in 1969. Conspiracy theorists. Top of their list was an incident involving 6 soldiers from the 701st Army Intelligence Unit based in Augsburg, West Germany. Their job had been to decipher highly sensitive and top-secret radio and satellite transmissions.
A group of people who turned out to be military intelligence people who had just plain left their observation post in Germany and come to the United States. They were missing in action for 5 days. The government didn't know where they were.
No one knew why, on July the 9th, 1990, the unit deserted, or where they'd gone, until one of them turned up in Gulf Breeze and was arrested by Patrol Officer Donald Stevens.
904-41402, private first class Hochstadt, sir.
We talked to this guy, interviewed him, and he just kept telling us, you just don't know what you got. And finally, he gave in and told us that him and 5 other deserters from the Army had stolen some computer chips and some high classified documents involved in UFOs, documents that the government had, and these guys were going to just blow this whole thing open.
The rest of the deserters were rounded up at a nearby house. The question on everyone's lips was, What did they know?
The NIA was involved, Naval Intelligence, CIA was involved, the FBI was involved, the Army Intelligence, and we had, I bet you, at least 10 to 15 different federal agencies in our police department interviewing these people at the same time.
An anonymous letter was sent to the army and the media demanding the release of the soldiers. If not, documents linking the government with UFOs would be released. 4 days later, the soldiers were freed and given an honorable discharge.
That was kind of strange. I was in the military, and you do something like desertion, you would usually get a dishonorable discharge, and it was just hard to believe these guys got a honorable discharge after what they had done.
Conspiracy theories, thousands of sightings. Were they just a product of the imaginations of people brought up on Star Trek and E.T.?
There has been the suggestion that many of the sightings are a result of people sort of, I wouldn't say mass hysteria, but the excitement of seeing things in the sky.
Is this beautiful or what?
I was riding my bicycle, and a craft did come down and take me, and they were doing surgery on my knees.
Whether the stories are true or not, it certainly seems that many people in Gulf Breeze believe they've had a close encounter. This has led to the foundation of a most unlikely support group.
I know that I fought them. I mean, I can remember fighting them, because I remember kicking one and I remember punching another one. So I know I fought them. I started this support group about 3 years ago for people who felt that they had been abducted by aliens and taken aboard a craft and had medical procedures performed on them, then brought back.
What I was standing at my kitchen window, and one of the little fellows was outside the window, eye high, even though he was really a short fellow. Somehow he was eye to eye with me, and I'm pounding on the blinds and just screaming at him, "Go away, you can't come in." And all his reaction was, just kind of thinking to me was, well, gee, I thought we had some kind of a relationship here. He was surprised that he thought I would ask them in.
People can come together and talk with each other about their experiences. So many times if they talk to other people about it, people tell them that they're crazy.
Maybe we're not all dealing with the same ETs, maybe they're different.
This helps them to talk with each other without fear of ridicule.
The little short black ones took us to the ship, and one of the beings came and put their hand on my forehead, and the pain just totally went away. It was like a feeling of euphoria. It was the most wonderful feeling.
The support group shows just how far UFO mania has snowballed in Gulf Breeze. But there's an even more startling barometer of the locals' belief that there is something out there. They're joining 5,000 people across America who have taken out insurance against alien abduction. If you find that difficult to believe, take a look at this. It's a policy form issued by the American UFO Abduction Insurance Company of Altamonte Springs, Florida. Motto, beam me up, I'm covered. For $20, your relatives have the comfort of knowing that they will get $10 million if you're carried off. And the only proof required is the signature of the abducting alien. Good night.